Yep, we are now live.
Okay, so welcome to the virtual cabinet panel on the environments being conducted with members and officers at various locations, communicating by audio, video and online. There's also an opportunity for the public and press to listen and view proceedings. We have some contributors from various organisations here to provide input and feedback. Before the meeting starts, I'd like to invite the committee member and scrutiny officer to take a roll call to confirm that everybody's here. Hello. Ella, are you going to do the roll call?
Sorry, can you hear me?
No.
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Sorry, I've lost my connection. Hey, good evening, everyone. So when your name is called, please indicate your attendance to confirm the required members, officers and registered speakers can hear and be heard. So, yes, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
So do we have Councillor Jarvis?
We do.
Do we have Councillor Allen?
Here.
Do we have Chris Hinchcliffe?
Yeah.
Do we have George Davis? Do we have Councillor Wang Carroll? Do we have Councillor Michael Muir? Do we have Councillor Vi Bryant?
Yes.
And do we have Councillor Claire Strong?
Yes, good evening.
Okay, and now on to the officers. Do we have Georgina Chapman?
Present.
Do we have Andrew Mills?
Present.
Do we have Edward Lee? And do we have Deborah Coates?
Present.
And now just on to the registered speakers. Do we have Roger Lovegrove?
Present.
And do we have John Webb?
Present, Miss.
Is there anyone else in attendance that I haven't called out who's registered to speak? No? Okay, I'll hand back to the chair.
Diane Ketcher's there.
Yes, I'm not registered to speak though.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, apologies for absence. We have apologies from Carol Stanier and Gerald Morris, and having gone through the rights process, Claire Strong is substituting for Gerald. Welcome, Claire. Minutes of the meeting on the 11th of January. Is everyone happy that we take those as read and approved as an accurate record of what we discussed then? Yep, okay. Thanks very much. Okay, so in accordance with the council's policy, the meeting is being audio recorded as well as filmed. The audio recording is available on the mod.gov system, and the film recordings around the council's YouTube via the council's YouTube channel. Members are reminded to make declarations of interest before items in the usual way as set out on the agenda. And members, and indeed everyone, is reminded that the council has declared a climate emergency, which is a serious decision, and means that as it's an emergency, all of us have that in mind when we carry out the various roles and tasks for the benefit of our district. I've agreed to make some changes to the order in which we take items, because I think it'd be sensible to take item 7 on the information note and work programme before we deal with the public participation. So we will take item 7 next, followed by item 5, followed by item 6. I think that gives us a more sensible order for the business. So that then brings us on to item 7, the work programme and action tracker. Georgina.
Hello. Yeah, so the action tracker and the work programme. I might do the action tracker first today because as this is a roundup meeting, I've got some slides for the kind of information note element of this. So the action plan is going to have a kind of fuller review in the new civic year, but the main action that we've kind of that we added last time was around investigating and publicising environmental employment skills learning modules. So our new trainee policy officer has been doing some research into both kind of vocational training and also courses and modules, which I think are uploaded somewhere with all the documents here, either at Hertfordshire colleges or at the University of Hertfordshire or at the Open University. So we've now got that kind of document kind of pulling all those things together, and next steps are trying to work out how we share it and who we share it with. I know Green Careers Week is in November, and we did have a school last November 2022 ask us for some kind of information about green careers, so we've got that ready for this year's Green Careers Week, but obviously we want to share it before then. So if anyone does have any good ideas about how we should share that or who we should share it with or how we should kind of promote that, do let me know, because we'd be really interested to hear about that. So in terms of the information note, I'm not going to go over everything that's in this kind of update because this is the sort of most recent update, but what I'm going to do is take you through some slides updating you on various projects that we've talked about in the meetings that have occurred this civic year. So if I share my screen. See this? Anyone? Yes, see it? Yeah, okay, Steve, I've seen your thumbs up. Thank you. So yeah, this is a kind of recap of some of the progress we've made on projects that we've talked about at previous environmental panel meetings. And so this is kind of giving you a bit of an update on some of those. It might feel a bit disparate because it's a bunch of different projects, but we really want to kind of let you know where we are with them. So the first one is a kind of roundup of the Solar Together scheme. So the Solar Together scheme is a scheme that we kind of organised through the HCCSP, so the Hertfordshire Climate Change and Sustainability Partnership, and it's working with a company called iChooser to run a solar bulk purchase scheme, so trying to kind of get interest in solar panels from the entirety of the county in order to hopefully benefit from the advantages of group purchase in terms of hopefully achieving a kind of lower price than an individual going to the market themselves. So the period for registering and accepting is closed, and from North Hertfordshire there were 2,260 registrations for solar PV, and 214 people accepted those offers, and 129 of the 214 have also added battery storage to their installation. There was also the option to apply for battery storage only, so for people that have already got solar panels, and 108 people from North Herts registered for this, and 11 accepted those offers. So the totals kind of brought us to having the second highest registrations and acceptances in the county after St Albans, and the installations are due to be complete by April. And then with the HCCSP, we're going to be kind of reviewing the process and sort of thinking about whether we want to run the scheme again. So similar vein, if we stick with buildings for now, so retrofitting. So one of the schemes that we've been working on this year and the tail end of last year is the Sustainable Warmth Scheme. So for those of you that know that, that's LAD 3 and HUG 1. So LAD 3 is the local authority delivery phase 3, and HUG is the home upgrade grant phase 1. So this scheme essentially looks to provide 10K's worth of retrofitting to eligible households. The eligibility criteria is a bit complicated, but basically it's you have to have a net income below £30,000 a year, and your house has to have an EPC rating of E, F or G. Some D-rated properties are allowed, but there's currently a cap on the amount of D-rated properties that we can provide upgrades to. It targets both on-gas and off-gas properties, so LAD 3 is on-gas and HUG 1 is off-gas. It takes a fabric-first approach, so everyone that signs up and who is eligible will get a survey done, and they will be recommended things in the first instance like triple glazing or like insulation, and then if someone's kind of done those things, they might be able to get something like solar panels. So at the end of 2022, we did a bunch of comms, and we also did a mail out to possibly eligible households. So possibly eligible because the data we had was on EPC ratings, so we kind of could target those properties that had the poorer EPC ratings, but we didn't know what people's household incomes were, and it's possible that some houses might have been upgraded in the interim, and so some people's households might have been a D rated but then been pushed up to a C and no longer been eligible. So from that, the kind of early indications from the data is that we've hit our targets for the amount of houses that we need. So this round of the scheme is looking to retrofit around 54 homes in North Herts, and installations are due to be complete shortly. We're still awaiting a government decision on a scheme extension because at the moment there's kind of concern that some people who have signed up won't get their installations done in time for the time frame that was originally set. So we're waiting a decision on an extension and also lifting the cap on the amount of D-rated properties that can benefit, because there were quite a lot of D-rated properties that signed up and who were eligible. And then we're currently preparing for the next round of the scheme as well. So the next round will be the Home Upgrade Grant 2. So that will be targeting off-gas properties only. Sticking with housing, so when we reviewed our climate change strategy in 2021, we put this action in it, which is require Passive House, BREEAM or similar standards for all development on land sold by the council. So this was us essentially trying to see if we could require higher environmental standards for development through basically a covenant or a terms of sale agreement, if we weren't kind of able to do so through our planning process at the moment. So this is purely on land that the council is selling. That's why we're able to kind of create a covenant or a terms of sale. And what we decided to do was use a site that we were looking to sell at Clare Crescent in Baldock as a sort of test or trial for negotiating with the developer to require higher environmental standards on the development that they were going to put on the site. So you can see in the picture, the pink area is the area that is North Herts owned, and then the yellow area is a site that was owned by a developer, and we found out that they were looking to develop the site, and so then we saw the opportunity to try and sell our pink portion to them so that they could increase the size of their development. So that's like kind of became earmarked for sale. But then when Cabinet came to approve the sale, they did so on the proviso that there would be a negotiation with the prospective buyer on kind of higher environmental standards required for that development. So the total development for the whole site is 8 affordable flats and 16 private houses, and the sustainability measures that we have been able to negotiate, they applied to the 8 flats. And the agreement that was reached has been to include EV charging points for 25% of the parking spaces, so 3 out of 12, solar panels for the communal areas of the building, installation of triple glazing to Passive House window standards, and also a fabric first approach to insulation and minimising heat loss for walls and floors. And you can kind of see the U values there and how they compare to a Passive House range. And that last point is up to a certain monetary value. We did have to make some concessions in order to get the purchaser to agree to those kind of higher environmental standards. This was sort of a renegotiation of what we'd already negotiated. So the concessions were that the purchaser requested that the council share equally increased Section 106 costs. So those increased costs are as a result of the biodiversity policies that have come into play. And then also the offer that they were making for the plot of land that we were trying to sell did reduce. I'm not allowed to say what the figures were, but it reduced by around 10%. The agreements that we reached with them, so for these higher environmental standards, form part of the terms of sale, which means that the developer is legally obliged to implement the agreed measures, which is really good. And it's given us a really good understanding of how to kind of work with a local sustainability architect in negotiating with a developer for some higher environmental standards on land that we're selling. So it's been a good kind of learning opportunity, and we're now looking at how we can do this for further sites that we're planning to sell. So an example is a site at Cowshaw, where there is a self-build scheme that's been able to secure some kind of high environmental standards around renewable source heating and good drainage and water supply standards. The last thing that I was going to update you on is the biodiversity baseline. So this was something that was done through the HCCSP, whose logo is up in the corner. North Herts has been leading on the biodiversity subgroup, which is one of the subgroups within the HCCSP, and we've been leading on that since its invent in 2020. And as part of that, we've been creating a biodiversity action plan for the county, and one of the key actions that we put in that plan was to create a biodiversity baseline for the county, which would give us a sort of ecological overview, an overview of the ecological status of Hertfordshire. So the baseline covers the entirety of the county, regardless of land ownership or land type or land usage. And it's identified around 5 million land polygons, and each one is assigned a unit score in line with Natural England's biodiversity metric 3.0. The data that it's used is kind of a mixture of open source national data, data from our local environmental record centre, Blue Skies National Tree Map, some aerial imagery, and normalised difference vegetation index. And so this baseline is now ready, and it's available for officers in all the Hertfordshire authorities to use. And so it's mainly going to be used by sustainability and policy officers, green space officers, planners, and transport and infrastructure officers. And the kind of things, to give you an idea, that it can assist with are, so the development of the local nature recovery strategy, which is mandated through the Environment Act. And those are kind of spatial strategies to help us improve biodiversity. And that will be done at a kind of county-wide level. And so it'll involve county council working with the district councils to create this strategy. And the baseline will give us a good picture of what kind of already exists and what levels of biodiversity there are, and how we could possibly link them up. It will also help us with identifying strategic sites for biodiversity offsetting. So this is related to the Environment Act's biodiversity net gain policy, so whereby developers will have to sort of, as a result of their development, plus add 10%, and it won't always be possible for them to do that on the site of their development, so they'll be looking for places to sort of offset that net gain, and hopefully this resource can help us with finding the best places for them to offset that gain, so that we don't lose those units. Otherwise, there's the risk of developers putting them elsewhere in the country. It can also help us with maximising the opportunities of the Environmental Land Management Scheme. So that's ELMS, and that's also part of the Environment Act. And it's where farmers and landowners will be paid when they provide public goods. So public goods in this instance being things like wildlife or cleaner water, or things that will help with climate change adaptation. And so this kind of help us work out where those kind of schemes would be appropriate. It can also help us provide an initial biodiversity evaluation of land parcels which are under consideration for development. So I'll show you in a minute a sort of snip of the baseline, and you can kind of see the information that it gives. And it will also hopefully help us in measuring changes in biodiversity levels, particularly with regards to national goals and targets. So one of the main targets is the 30 by 30, so protecting 30% of the UK's land for biodiversity by 2030. It's not really been fleshed out yet how that's going to be done, but we're hoping that this gives us a kind of good evidence base to be able to then input data in the future and compare how the biodiversity levels have changed across the county. So yeah, last time we talked about this, I don't think it was available, so I haven't shown anybody, I don't think, the baseline or the pictures. So this is a screenshot from the main page. So you can select what district you're looking at, and then you can. So this is St Ipolyt's, and so you can kind of see the different habitats are shown. So the white with the orange stripes across it over here is cropland, and then areas and urban areas, and then there's grassland areas in green. And if I kind of show you the next slide as well, you can see you can see the kind of information that can be brought up when you click on a particular polygon, and you can see that the polygon's edges will be highlighted in this kind of turquoise color. So it will tell you its habitat level. It will tell you, you know, for this one, it tells you that it's a cropland and what kind of crops are grown there. And then you'll see, if you look down, there's a biodiversity unit score, and that's the one that's in line with the biodiversity metric from Natural England, and which will kind of help us to ascertain the sort of amount of biodiversity essentially that is on a given piece of land. And just to sort of give you an idea, the polygons are quite kind of detailed. So if we go back to this one, you know, this person's garden, this green section of their garden will be one polygon, and then their neighbour's garden will be like another polygon. So it can be fairly kind of useful. So I thought it would be nice for you to kind of have an update on that, because I know we've talked about it before, but you probably haven't seen it. That's the kind of gist of my update today. There's a few other things that are in the information note, but I probably won't rehash those for the moment, because you can probably read them yourselves. Does anybody have any questions?
Thanks, Georgina. Questions for Georgina? Can't see any.
John should have a question.
Sorry, who? I'd say Dear Linda and Chris.
John.
Hi. In regard to the slide on higher sustainability, those provisions, has it been ascertained or tested, that is legally, whether some of these measures can be applied through the planning processes? Does that make sense?
Yes,
Georgina?
I think it does. It might be something that Debbie or Henry want to input into, but I think our understanding at the time was that we weren't able to kind of make that requirement through the planning system, I think, because I think our local plan doesn't have that policy. Is that kind of right, Debbie? Yeah, our local plan doesn't currently have that policy. So we weren't kind of able to enforce something like that through the planning system, hence why the way that we kind of, you know, decided to do it instead was by making it a requirement on land that's being sold by the council, because then the mechanism through which it's happening is not through planning, it's through a kind of covenant on our land. But I don't know, that's kind
I was hoping for the planning system, because that would apply in effect everywhere, even if you were pioneering. But of course you'd have to accept the legal obstacle.
So I think this is probably getting into some of the things we're going to talk about in the sustainability SPD a bit later on, John. So perhaps we'll come back to that later.
Steve, can I just ask, which version of the local plan is that? The new one or the old one?
The currently adopted one.
Oh, that's a bit of an oversight, isn't it?
Well,
no comment needed.
The thing you have to remember about the local plan is that it took 5 years to get it through the examination process nearly.
We all remember that.
So the local plan as adopted is probably not the local plan that the council would have if it had set out on it now or even a year or two ago.
Time to revise it then, maybe. Okay.
Yes, and we should be talking about that later, probably. Dear Linda, and then Chris.
Good evening. Yeah, a couple of things going back to the houses that on the land that has been sold, and the passive house rating you're aiming for 0.21. Does that include? Is the part of the agreement in the selling of the houses that no gas is piped into the building, so the building will have to run on electricity, and we're no longer supplying gas to those buildings? Why did I understand clearly from the way you explained that only the flats are supposed to be, but the houses don't need to be as well insulated and at such a high standard? Is that correct?
I'll answer that bit first. So yeah, it is just the flats, and part of I don't know, I can't really share my screen again now, but so essentially on that picture where there's the pink section of North, and maybe I can, maybe let me try and share this so that I can explain it a bit better. So where there's the pink little strip of land here, that's North Herts land, and obviously it's kind of landlocked. And I think from the perspective of our estates team, there was kind of limited things that they could do with it if this developer didn't really want it. And it had already, because it had already been earmarked for development before this action came into play in our climate change strategy, a sale had already been negotiated. And then when Cabinet went to approve it, they said this action now applies in our climate change strategy. So what happened was that we sort of had to go back and renegotiate. So I think because of that, our negotiating position probably wasn't as strong as it could have been in other circumstances. And so it does only apply to the 8 flats. With regards to whether it includes no gas, I'm not actually sure. I don't think it does, but I will check with our estates team and let you know.
So it would be good if going forward and in terms of improving air quality in general and all of that, including in the homes, and given the presentation you had, the last one, is to make sure that the properties don't have gas to start with. They run without it, and also they don't have chimneys, so there is no temptation to put in the burning of wood and log fires and all of that, which reduce the air quality for everybody and the pollution.
Yeah.
The Kelshall one certainly won't have any gas because there's no gas in Kelshall.
Oh, okay. I wasn't aware of that. Yeah. So, but the other question I'd like is about the biodiversity. The 2 things I'd like to mention. I've just been yesterday for a walk out in Common, and the one thing I noticed is even where the cows that were there left their cow pads, there were no dung beetles on them. Now, in the UK, there's supposed to be 60 species of dung beetles. 50% of them are very depleted. And I thought, if this land is deprived of dung beetles, then that is suffering in terms of reduced biodiversity. And is there a way of bringing in dung beetles from where they exist to improve the quality of the land and what happens there? And the same thing for anywhere else in any other woodlands. Is there a study being done for that?
So I mean, Andrew Mills is going to talk about various biodiversity activities on the council's land. I'm not sure whether or not he's able to answer the question about dung beetles, but he is going to talk about what we're doing in terms of biodiversity improvement on a number of pieces of the council's land. So perhaps we should come back to that once Andrew's told what he was doing to. Unless you want to talk about dung beetles now, Andrew.
No, I haven't got anything to say about dung beetles, I'm afraid. It hasn't appeared on my agenda, to be perfectly honest, at the present time.
Everybody thinks of moths and butterflies and birds and other animals like foxes and whatever, and badgers. But unfortunately, one of the things that makes a land depleted is the lack of it. It's because the population of dung beetles it crashes and is no longer there to provide support to all the other animals.
Okay, I think we'll have to take that away as something that we think about the implications for.
And the other thing, when it's an opportunity, I'd like to ask about land for planting trees, but if it's not appropriate now, I'll come back to that.
Andrew is definitely going to talk about that. So let's hear what Andrew has to say, and then we'll come back to that. Chris.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Georgina. Just a quick question regarding the bulk purchase of the solar panels. I'm sure lots of us have heard about the very concerning reports to do with the human rights issues with the production of solar panels in many cases. So I was wondering what steps were taken to ensure the bulk purchase was achieving ethical procurement of the solar panels that are being installed.
So the panels were all procured by iChooser, who's the company that run it with local authorities. I will have to check with them what steps they took. But in terms of the local authorities, the people that kind of signed the contract with iChooser, we had one local authority signing the contract with iChooser on behalf of all the other authorities was decorum, and their legal team did a lot of due diligence. So I expect that sort of thing would have been picked up, but I will look into it and let you know.
Roger.
Hi, just on the same theme, do we have a simple answer as to why the take-up of Solar Together was not particularly good?
Yeah, I think I sent round an email after the last panel. I can resend it to you, Roger, which was data that, you know, have you seen it? So essentially the kind of most popular option, the most popular reason was that the cost was too much. And we know that, and iChooser have sent us through a report that kind of acknowledges that the cost saving that they were able to achieve with this round of the scheme was not as much as they had achieved previously, and that is largely to do with the various global issues that are ongoing, and the supply chains. And so that seems to be the kind of main reason. So that will be something that we kind of consider when we think about whether we're going to run the scheme again. Yeah,
I think there's clearly an issue with both panel availability and also installation capacity. And the whole issue about installation capacity is why we're trying to engage with local training providers and North Arts College and others. And that's something that I know other councils are doing, because there's clearly a need to drive up the capacity of the industry that is installing solar panels and retrofitting installation, if we're going to achieve anywhere near the sort of level of rollout that we need. But I think to some extent the scheme has been a victim of its own success. It's driven up the demand for solar panels, and that unfortunately has driven up the price. But I'm pleased not only that we've got the second best take up in Hertfordshire, but also I've met quite a lot of people who are actively investigating panels outside the scheme. And I think that was always one of my hopes. Not only would this actually, would there be some people who would fit solar panels as a result of the scheme directly, but that others would be encouraged to think about it and maybe do it on their own outside. So I think it's done well from an awareness raising point of view, and I hope we can run another round of it in the future.
I think North Arts is to be congratulated on being second from top there. That's really great.
Yeah, we'll try and beat St Albans next time if we're going in.
Thank you.
Okay, we better move on then. So next we have Andrew Mills. Andrew.
Hi, evening everybody. So I'm looking at providing an update regarding the wilding of the work that we've been doing. So as a quick recap, in 2019, we worked with Countryside Management Services from the County Council, and we undertook a wilding audit of our parks and open spaces across the district, and other larger areas, to try and identify the opportunities to improve biodiversity through whatever means that we could identify. So CMS undertook the audit, and then in 2020 we actually started to try and implement that work. And the first site that we commenced that was the change of mowing regimes on the area between Letchworth Gate and Waysbrook, which is on the left-hand side as you drive into Letchworth, just after the Longabout. And Diane knows it very well. And that was our first toe in the water, if you like, both experimenting with wilding. And then last year, 2021, we expanded that to Walsworth Common and Wilby Road Rec, which was also in Letchworth, also known as Archers Way Recreation Ground. And those areas we then did a change of mowing regimes, but also decided to introduce an overseeding with a wildflower seed mix, which was actually cultivated into the grass sward there. Last year, we sort of monitored those areas, and the weather last year with the heat wave really did impact on the results that we were not seeing, basically. So we were looking to expand the programme this year. So one of the first things that we did was to revisit and overseed those three areas that we've already done, which was at Weisbrook, Walswood Common and Wilbury Rec, because the initial seeding had really suffered and we needed to bolster that seed bank within in the sward. Just to sort of say then, with the maintenance regimes on those, for the first year, we've been advised that it's best to actually mow those wildflower sown areas on a regular basis, basically to stop those new plants from actually flowering and seeding. Because if they do flower and seed in the first year, they will just put all their energy into producing seed and they will die. The idea is to have the wildflower plants that we've sown out competing the grass in the grass sward, and therefore we want to get a really nice strong plant before we allow it to go to seed, which will be in year 2. So don't expect to see much flower this year. That's what I'm trying to say anyway. So in 2022 and moving forward into 23, we've undertaken further works and we've done further seeding works as well, and they've been at Buzz Close in Hitchin, Clough Common, Baldock, Icknield Way Cemetery in Letchworth, Ransom's Rec and St John's Rec, Swinburne Rec, all in Hitchin, Temple Gardens all in Letchworth, and the biggest area, which is over 10,500 square metres of wilding, has been in Royston on what is known as the Twigdens estate, which is where the leisure centre is based, and it's that estate. And there's a big open space around the perimeter of that development with quite a lot of general amenity grassland, but we're now putting over to a wilding sort of mowing regime. We did at Twigdens last year, we did experiment with the mowing, and we've now seeded into that as well. And the Twigdens estate and Royston in particular is quite interesting because of it's on a chalk soil, and I think we'll be getting a very different result in Royston to what we would do, say, in Hitchin, just because of the soil types that we've got across the district. Over and above that, we've undertaken to plant about 1,200 metres of hedging, and they've been at Clough Common, Swinburne Recreation Ground primarily, St John's Recreation Ground and Icknield Way Cemetery. A lot of that hedging is gapping up of existing hedging where the hedge has either died out or been damaged and got broken down, and so we're bolstering up existing. And we've undertaken to plant nearly 60 trees as part of the project as well. For example, we put 9 trees in at Ransom's Recreation Ground just to try and bring that mature sort of scene into the landscape that we've got there. The other thing that we've been working on is obviously we implemented the new mowing regimes on the highway verges with the John O'Connor's contract, and these are the highways verges within the urban developments primarily of Royston, Letchworth, Baldock and Hitchin, but it does include Great Ashby as well. And we did a reduced frequency of mowing, and we didn't do a herbicide spray around obstacles. And we also implemented a reduced strimming every other cut, every other visit. Last year was the first year that we did that, and traditionally before that it would have been mown on a very, well not very, but a quite frequent, on a high frequency of probably around about 12 to 14 cuts a year and stringed every cut. So we're cutting less than half at the moment. Again, the weather really did impact on that, and really what we really saw initially was a really good display of dandelions in the grass verges because they virtually turned yellow for a period of time. But we didn't see, because of the hot weather, the improvements of habitat and flora later on in the year, because primarily it just got burnt off. So this year we're hopeful that we'll see a bit more of a benefit of that, of the mowing regime there. Really good news on that was that the public perception was really good. We didn't get very many comments at all, and negative comments. Those that we did receive, we were able to explain what we were doing and why we were doing it. And once the residents that contacted us understood, they seemed to appreciate what we were trying to do and went away at least knowing and understanding, even if they weren't happy 100% with the situation. So we're pursuing that. John O'Connor's are also, we're looking at trying to get them to introduce more electric equipment, for example. So some of their hand machines, hedge cutters and things like that, they're going to electric, and we're doing a few trials on that. And that's been drip fed in into the contract as we move forward. The other big project that we have on is at Ivell Springs, and we've been working with Affinity Water and Anglian Water to reintroduce water flow into the springs. Over recent years, and there's a lot of discussion about for the reasons, but the springs have dried up, particularly in the summer. And the riverbed from the springs has been so dry that I've been actually able to walk up the riverbed all the way to the springs without even getting wet feet. So they're going to be doing an augmentation project where they're going to be sinking a borehole, which is where the current sewage works are that takes all the surface water from Baldock. They're going to put a borehole down into the aquifer and pump the water up onto the springs, so that we've got a revitalising, re-energising the chalk stream at the spring head. So that will then join the permanent water supply where the permanent river, where it commences more or less just below Radwell. And the Revival Group have been very high profile in that project. They've been involved and consulted, and they've been directing some of the aspirations of that project. One of the issues that was identified was that the springs, actually, when they do produce water, the riverbed actually flows uphill before it starts to flow down. So there's going to have to be some work to do to actually create a proper flow away from the springs, or else we're at risk of creating a very big puddle, I think, if we're not careful. That work has been in the planning process for quite a long time, and we're expecting that to start imminently and run through into March and probably early April. That project is being funded completely by the water companies, and I've just really had the pleasure of being able to facilitate that, and which is seen as a big positive for Ivell Springs and the watercourse beyond. Ivell Springs obviously is a local nature reserve, and there's quite a lot of pressure on Baldock in the future with development. So this has really been seen as a big positive to get this done for now and for the future. The other big issue that we've got is the collapsed weir on the river at Orton Head Common, and the actual 1960s, 1970s structures actually collapsed, and the river is now bypassing the weir. And in consultation with the Environment Agency, they've advised us that if we were revisiting that situation now, they are having a policy of removing structures that block watercourses. So we're now having to look at basically removing the weir and finding a way to get the river to flow down a significant fall or reduction in ground level without losing the body of water that's in the river upstream. So we have now got outline designs that have been considered and are accepted by the Environment Agency, and we're now seeking to go to a detailed design stage when we need specialist consultants to develop that before we go out to a contract to deliver the actual work on the ground.
I think it's fair to say that the collapse of the weir will probably mean we have a better river in the long run, though, won't it?
Yes, that is very true, and it's been noted already that as the weir has collapsed, water quality has improved naturally anyway, which is bizarre. So there was no catastrophic breakage of a dam downstream or anything like that. Well, no one really actually noticed it. It was one of the neighbours that rang up and sort of said, "Do you know that this has happened?" The actual timescales seem to be quite protracted, and we're looking at potentially delivering the actual work during the summer of 2024. By the time we've got all the design and contract procurement work. So yes, so that's one thing that we're sort of working on at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer questions. I'm sure there are loads.
Yeah, I think I'm sure there'll be some questions. I can see one in the chat about dung beetles from John. Does anyone have any other questions?
I can do a recruitment drive for beavers to build dams, but we haven't had any take up at the moment. But if we could control where they build their dams, that would be great. But
no, that's difficult. Questions for Andrew? Dear Linda.
Okay, sorry to go back. You mentioned a couple earlier on about sinking a borehole to feed the drying streams and having problems with land that goes up before it goes down again.
Yeah.
Couple of thoughts have occurred to me. The sinking a borehole to provide water for streams that should be running naturally raises problems. It doesn't just solve. This sounds like a human engineering solution to something that a problem we're creating of our own making, which is climate change. And in creating this human engineering, in applying this human engineering solution, what we're doing is artificially even more quickly lowering the water table, because now we're bringing the water that is in the ground up for the stream, only for it to flow straight out to the sea. Now, I know it does some good along the way, but all the water that we're drawing from the water tables is adding to sea level rises. What solves the health of our streams wherever we're pumping water from the water table is adding to the global problem of sea level rises. So is this really a long-term solution? And should we be encouraging it at all?
Certainly, I can just comment on that. No, it isn't a long-term solution. The reason there's no water in the River Ivel is because the level of abstraction is very high.
Yes, but
changing the level of abstraction is something that isn't going to happen overnight. So this is a short-term intervention, and it isn't additional water. It's water that is currently being extracted. So there is a limit on the amount that can be abstracted, and the water that is pumped into the river will be taken from that limit. So the total amount of water abstracted from the aquifer will be the same, merely that some of it will be put into the river instead of put into the water supply system. But I agree with you, it's not a long-term solution, but changing the water supply arrangements in a way that continues to supply drinking water to people, which obviously we have to do, is at best going to take 10 years, probably. So this is a short-term measure to try and improve the environment of the river in the meantime. And there are some other rivers in other chalk streams in North Hertfordshire which have augmentation. The Orton does, and the Ree at Ashwell does. But I agree, they're short-term. It's a short-term fix, not the long-term solution.
I wanted to raise just the idea that by extracting from the aquifer, we're actually lowering the level of the water in the aquifers, and in that we're doing two things. We're actually making the water in the land deeper for trees that struggle to find water in droughts in the summer, to have to send their roots even deeper to find the water in the land, and some of the trees will die because their root system is just not deep enough. So the more water we take out of the aquifer, whether it is for human consumption or whether it is to top up the rivers, it has an impact on the thriving of especially the large trees. Anyway, that is something that needs to be borne in mind. And the other one is I'm part of the group, the North Herts Interfaith Forum, that for a while we've been wanting to find land on which to have a tree planting project. And we struggled to find land where we can do that, because effectively the land that there is mostly in North Herts District area is owned by somebody. If the council is looking for somewhere to increase land tree planting and part of this ELMS or whatever other scheme, is there a way that you can recommend or assign an area of land, and we would gladly be part of the tree planting team or whatever, because we'd love to have a tree, a sort of a project of planting trees, especially when we celebrate religious festivals and things like that. So I don't know if it can, can be part of something that you can help us with, but with volunteering our work, and if you could provide the land.
I'll let Andrew come back on that, but I think if the council had lots of land, we would happily be planting trees on it. The issue is the few locations, which is one of the reasons why last winter before last, we gave away trees to residents so they could plant them on their land, because the residents of North Hertfordshire have far more land than the council. Andrew, do you just want to come back on that? Sorry, I shouldn't really have butted in there.
That's fine. We have quite a number of requests of this sort, and to be honest, we haven't got enough space to plant trees on land that we currently have. So the land that we have has a whole host of uses and provisions. Yes, we could plant more trees, but then do we take out other facilities such as football pitches or amenity grassland and things like that? So trees are part of the answer. They're not the whole part, and there just isn't enough space for us to do that. And I don't think the council's in a position where we could go and start buying land to plant trees. One of the best places that we have at the moment that we are looking to landscape in the future is Wilbury Hill Cemetery, where we're looking to expand into the neighbouring field to landscape that in preparation for the future expansion of the cemetery. So that will be something that we will have more tree planting on there. Like everybody else, we're just really keen to take up any opportunity that we can.
Thanks, Andrew. Val.
I just wanted to thank Andrew for his work on rewilding, which seems to be going really well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Claire.
Well, I was going to give a shout out to Andrew because he forgot to mention that the council has worked in partnership with other organisations for tree planting. And yes, very kindly, council did give Rotary Club, of which I'm president, a strip of land on Swinburne Recreation, and we have planted 2,000 trees. So it was a community project, and I'm sorry if Linda, you didn't see that we were doing it, because we'd have loved more volunteers to have come along. But on the day, we actually had lots and lots of people. It was quite a muddy weekend, but there are 2,000 trees there. And yes, yeah, it's not a huge piece of land, but it was very good that we did it. Yes, it was great. And on the Alton Head and the weir. Yes, that's good. It's a long time that, but yes, you are right that the weather quality downstream, because I walk it quite regularly, so I do have noticed it is looking very nice and clear. However, I know the residents locally, they've lost the water because the water was being diverted through them because of the mills, which it now isn't. So they've got stagnant, muddy ponds at the bottom of their gardens. But also, I think it's the one, and I did flag it up when I had our briefing, but I'll flag it up again here. The issue I have with Orton Head is that the planning permission has now been granted for building of the nitrate removal plant so that the Water Authority can bring that site back in to abstract water at some time when they've done their work. And I do think that's one that we need to make sure is on our radar and that we do watch it, because, always, we've seen what's happened on the Ivel. We just don't want the same thing to happen at Orton Head.
Exactly so. The problem is, of course, the level of abstraction gets controlled by the Environment Agency. And until very recently, they've been in the habit of giving people perpetual licenses. Now, I understand that's going to change, and that some of the licenses that water companies currently have will be withdrawn over the next few years. But until that happens, there's a continuing problem with chalk streams, I think.
But we know what the build is going to be like in this area. That's going to put a much higher demand on a lot of properties. So, again, when we get into planning and supplementary planning, having homes that use more grey water in them will reduce the demand that those new properties have on taking fresh water, if you like, out of the pipe. So,
I think that's important. Hopefully, Debbie's going to tell us more about that in the sustainability SPD. Okay, I think we need to move on, so we will get to that at a reasonable time. So next we have Edward Lee. Edward is going to talk about transport. At least I assume that's what you're going to talk about, Edward.
Indeed, yes. Good evening. Yes, I will be giving an update on sustainable transport in North Hertfordshire. So I'm just going to share my screen. So hopefully you can see.
Yeah, we can see that.
Now, I'm going to start with the local cycling and walking infrastructure plan. So we did a consultation on that last year, and in working with Hertfordshire County Council, that is designed to create a coherent plan for the whole of the district, focused on the towns, that involves widening pavements where they're too narrow, creating safer junctions for people walking and cycling, putting in more pedestrian and cycle crossings, creating protected cycle lanes where there's space to do that, and putting in a variety of other measures called modal filters and other traffic management measures. And you might wonder what counts as a modal filter. That's usually a bollard in a road that stops motor traffic going through but allows cycles to carry on through. But it could also be a camera that allows buses through, emergency service vehicles, refuse collection vehicles, but doesn't allow other people through, although they'll be fined if they go through. But other measures include putting pinch points to try and reduce speeds, reduce conflicts, creating raised crossings so the pavement continues at a level, so that actually the motor vehicles clearly have to give way as the new updated highway code requires, and a variety of other measures to try and create an environment that's safer and more attractive for walking and cycling. So we're working with Hertfordshire County Council, who are currently analysing the feedback from the consultation. We actually had, the county was surprised by the amount of feedback that we generated, which was good. And we are currently reviewing that and looking to see what amendments we need to make to the draft plan before that goes forward. And the current timetable is for it to go to the Cabinet at North Herts in June. It's that late partly because of the elections this year. And then once they've seen it, it will then go forward to the Highways and Transport Cabinet panel at Hertfordshire County Council to then be formally adopted. But even all through this process, it is a document in the public domain. Our development management teams, both here and at the County Council, can use that as a reference in terms of identifying projects that development might fund. And we can also use it for applying for funding applications from Active Travel England and other government funds. And in fact, the Hertfordshire County Council has been awarded some funding, some of which will be attributed to delivering or designing those schemes in the plan. So moving on, you might have seen something in the news about bus service cuts. There was an article in the BBC News that was looking at how much bus services have been cut across England. And in there was a graphic that said that Hertfordshire saw the biggest drop of 56.5%. That's in bus vehicle miles driven in the course of the 2021 to 2022 year compared with 2016 to 2017. Now, I was skeptical about that, so I dug into the data that was used to generate that. And if you look on the bottom of the screen, you'll see that there's a little table there of the commercial vehicle miles, and that's the mileage driven by bus services which are run by the operators on a for-profit basis, so not ones that are commissioned by the local authority. And you can see that in 2016-17 there was a sudden 50% increase almost in vehicle mileage, which then reverted back to what it was more or less the same as the previous year. So there's clearly something there's a problem there in the data. When I raised this with Hertfordshire County Council officers, they confirmed that they too believe that there's an error in the data. So actually, if you take 2015-16 as the reference point, then actually bus services have been reduced not by 56.5%, but by 39%. That's still a substantial cut and is considerably larger than the average cut across the whole of East of England. That's partly for two reasons. One is that actually Hertfordshire had a better bus service before COVID, before the sort of cuts came in, the big cuts came in. So we've come from a higher baseline, but also I think there's an anomaly in the pace at which services in Hertfordshire recovered. So I think we're kind of comparing two things which are not quite comparable with other regions. So we won't really know until we've seen a full year post-COVID, so 2022, 2023. But still, it indicates that bus services have been cut substantially. People who depend on bus services are either finding that they have less convenient services to use or no services at all. And that is a real problem. Fortunately, Fortunately, the County Council has won some money, £30 million.
Is someone not on mute? Can you make sure you're on mute, please? Thank you.
So the County Council has about £30 million from the Bus Service Improvement Fund to invest in bus services. So we should see some improvements. Some of those improvements will go to enhancing the HartsLink service. So this is what's called demand responsive, i.e. pre-bookable bus service that goes around most of North Hertfordshire and parts of East Hertfordshire. And it calls at bus stops around the region, not on a schedule, but on the basis of you booking to be picked up at a particular stop. It started in September 2021 using funding from the Department for Transport, and is now seeing about 1,500 person trips per month, which is good, but that still requires quite a heavy subsidy. And the subsidy that there is funding that will keep it going, and the Bus Service Improvement Fund will also go into that. It's expanding the fleet. That means that more buses will be available, particularly at short notice. And one of those buses that will be coming in April will be all electric. So at the moment we've got 4 diesel buses. They're mini buses, as you can see in that picture, and the one that will join the fleet later this year will be fully electric. So that £29.7 million will be partly invested in reducing fares. So actually the government, as you may be aware, has provided money to cap bus fares at £2. So it's the maximum you'll pay for a single journey is £2 on most bus services. Not all bus services are part of that scheme. I believe that Richmond Coaches in Royston is not part of that scheme, but most of the other operators are. But in addition to that, the County Council will be investing money to reduce the cost of some of the other tickets, particularly the day tickets. So from April, all of the what are called Interlink Explorers, these are multi-operator tickets. So you buy a ticket on one bus and you can use it on any of the other buses in the Hertfordshire region. Those will be reduced by 15%. There's a saver card that's currently available to young people between the age of 11 and 25. That will give people a 50% discount on all tickets. At the moment, it gives slightly less than a 50% discount on some tickets. Interestingly, the council is also going to, the County Council is going to introduce something called an e-purse. And this will work a bit like an Oyster card. And it's really targeted at people who don't have a debit or a credit card or a mobile phone, and so therefore can't use contactless payment. But with this card, they can preload it with some money, and then they can use it like everybody else as a credit or debit card. And one of the advantages of this will actually be to reduce the dwell time of buses, because the quicker people can get on and off the buses, the quicker we can get moving on to the next stop. From July, the Saver card that's currently only available to young people will be extended to people who are aged 60 and over. And that's really to plug the gap between a time when people are starting to retire and the official state retirement age, which currently is 66. So for those 6 years, you'll be able to get a Saver card that gives you a 50% discount on all fares. And the county is also going to introduce a new Saver card for people who are between those two ages, between 26 and 59, and that will give you a 15% discount on those Interlink Explorer tickets. So just to put those in monetary terms, these are what the figures look like. So currently you pay £9 for that day ticket that you can use on any bus service. If you're 11 to 25, you can get a Saver card that reduces that to £5. From April, those will reduce to £7.60 and then £3.80 if you've got the Saver card. And then from July, if you're over 60, you'll be able to apply for a Saver card that gives you a discount to £3.80 as well. And if you're between 26 and 59 and you're Herts resident, then you'll be able to apply for one that reduces it by 15% to £6.50. All of those fares are approximate. They will maybe round it up or down when it comes to actually introducing them. And the similar discounts will apply on weekly tickets as well. So you can see there'll be quite substantial savings for people who are travelling regularly. So the next thing to talk about is support for electric vehicles. Now you may be aware that the government's current strategy on decarbonising transport leans very heavily on electrifying vehicles, i.e. replacing internal combustion engine vehicles with electric vehicles. So to do that, we need to make sure that there are electric vehicle charging points everywhere that people need them. Now, there's quite a good provision on the motorway network at the service stations, but what we really need to be doing is providing charging points in towns and rural areas where people don't have off-street parking and therefore don't have the option of installing a charge point in their garage or on their driveway. And then that makes it possible for many more people to consider moving to an electric vehicle. So at the moment, the County Council is finalising a strategy around where to install EV charge points. That will come to the Council in March. And the essence of that policy is to prioritise installing charge points in car parks. So that's both public car parks and also supermarkets, leisure centres, private sites, the destinations that people are driving to, and also hub locations. So some petrol stations already have EV charge points, and there's potential on land that's owned by the County Council, even some land owned by the District Council, that we could use to create hubs for charging vehicles. And the advantage of that is that you can invest, so that to provide charge points, you sometimes have to upgrade the power supply to the area to be able to to put in rapid chargers, which can be 50 kilowatts, even up to 150 kilowatts. So if we need to make that sort of investment in the infrastructure, it's better to do it in one location and put lots of charge points off it than to do that, upgrading the infrastructure in lots of different places, which becomes much more expensive. And ultimately, we just won't be able to keep up with demand if we do it in that sort of piecemeal way. But we do recognise, the county recognises that we will need to install on street in some locations because there just isn't a convenient place to install a hub. And so they're developing tools to help us identify where are the places where we need to install on street, and then we'll prioritise those locations and roll them out, probably as part of a strategy and a procurement exercise that will be coordinated by the County Council. They have access to some funding called LEVI funding, LEVI, and that's funding from the government to really help install these kind of charge points for residents which are not necessarily commercially viable. In other words, they're not necessarily profitable for the private sector to do. So they will be coordinating that. In terms of what we're doing as a district, we are on the verge of appointing a supplier to install new charge points and replace the old ones, which have been there since 2014, in some of the car parks in Hitchin, Letchworth, Baldock and Royston. So we'll have 32 charge points, a mixture of probably 7 kilowatts and 22 kilowatts. And they're in locations that will qualify for some government funding, we hope. And they're particularly designed, or they're going to be aimed particularly at residents who don't have off-street parking. So they'll be able to leave their car overnight or for several hours in the evening to charge up. We're also going to install some additional charge points for our own fleet vehicles. This complements the 4 that we've installed in the council offices car park, which are used by the Careline electric cars and vans, and all the other vehicles that we use for parking enforcement, environmental enforcement, and general support services. Those will all gradually become fully electric, and they'll be using the dedicated charge points that we install. And the last thing I want to talk about is the sustainable travel towns. So this is led by the County Council. In our district, Letchworth, Garden City and Royston were both selected to be part of the programme. We've now set up the governance arrangements for that so that we've got a committee of local councillors to sort of steer these programmes. And we've got we're collecting sort of the evidence base in terms of what do we know about those towns. So we've commissioned detailed surveys of what people think about their town, what they think about the parking provision, what businesses want, and the sort of economic activity, what's working, what's not working. So we looked at that. We're going to look at transport data. We look at a whole lot of data. We're also going to be wanting to engage closely with the local communities through workshops and surveys to find out what local people want, what they see as the opportunities to improve choices for sustainable travel, and what we can do in terms of prioritising the local cycling and walking infrastructure plan. What parts of that do we want to deliver most quickly, and what do we need to do to improve bus services, and importantly to make bus services and rail services work better together, because there's a really big opportunity in North Hertfordshire to make better use of the railway as part of the local transport network, so that you can get a bus to a local railway station, get a fast train to another destination, and then another bus perhaps out, or mix that with cycling or e-scootering or whatever it might be. But there's North Herts is really well connected by the railway line, so we need to think how we can bring that more into play in helping people make journeys without using a car. So that's all from me.
Okay, thank you, Edward. Questions for Edward? I don't. Dear Linda.
Hi.
And then Val.
Just sorry. So you're talking. You mentioned about putting or requiring or encouraging putting electric car charge points in supermarkets and other places like that, public places. Are these going to be? Are we going to be encouraging also the covering of those parking areas with solar panels, so that underneath they would be able to charge the cars, but they would be generating some of the electricity at those areas? Just like in France, where they now all the car parks, whether they charge cars or not, are being required to be covered with solar panels to increase the amount of energy, renewable energy, that is generated by the nation.
It's a really good point, and I think car parks, where that can be done without creating an eyesore, that should definitely happen.
They're not an eyesore.
Well, there are some locations where it may not be appropriate, but no, I mean, in general, I agree with you. In terms of the car parks so supermarkets and so on, we currently don't have a mechanism for requiring that. But maybe the government will provide some funding to encourage the private sector to do that. In terms of our own car parks, we don't currently have a strategy to do that. But I think that is something we could take away and look at, see if we can build that into our thinking about how we use our car parks.
I think that's certainly something that we've talked about and we need to explore some more. Val.
Can I ask about on-road EV charging? It is not the priority of the county council. They've said that, and there's zero funding available for 2023-2024. Can you tell us more about the government subsidy that's going to be available? And have you got any idea what sort of figures we're talking about? How much may come to Hertfordshire?
So there's two pots of money that are available at the moment. One is called AUX, which is the off-street residential. I can't remember what the other bit stands for, but that's targeted at locations on street or off street which are close to streets where there is not off street parking. So we're hoping to get some funding for that to help us install the charge points that we're about to install. So about half of those 32 charge points should qualify for that. So 60% of the cost will be covered by the government if we get that funding. In terms of the Levi fund, that is targeted at a range of things. It is also targeted at providing charge points for residents that don't have off-street parking. There's also an opportunity for sort of innovative arrangements. So if a local authority wants to innovate in how it provides or how it sort of mixes provision and in whatever way that that they think might be worth doing, that the private sector doesn't currently think is viable, that would qualify. But at the moment, we are just focused on, in the first place, putting charge points in our own car parks, and then the next stage will be to look at our own assets like leisure centres, smaller car parks, and rolling out through those. We'll also be putting some in the multi-storey car parks. And then beyond that, I think we're then looking at with the county council on-street locations and land that is either county council or district council owned that might be suitable for creating charging hubs, and Levi funding may be available to help make some of those possible.
Hertfordshire appears to have a unique strategy. Hertfordshire County Council appears to have a unique strategy of believing that on-street charging is virtually unnecessary. And I have to say, I mean, some of you know I'm a county council, and I'd argue that's a foolish approach. And I've yet to find any other organisation apart from the Hertfordshire County Council that believes that that is a satisfactory way to provide EV charging to drive up the use of these things. So we all need to keep arguing that actually on-street charging is an important part of making EV use viable.
I mean, to be fair, they have moved some way from where they were certainly when I joined the council just over a year ago. So on-street charging is certainly acknowledged as being necessary, and they have actually invested in creating a tool to identify suitable or locations where on-street is likely to be the only sensible solution, and then to identify which bits on street are most likely to be suitable in terms of where there's sufficient width without obstructing a pavement or without creating other problems. So I think they have listened both to, I mean, we have certainly made points around that, and so have other districts and boroughs, and they have listened. So actually the paper that will come in March will have moved quite some distance from the last one that was
good, because it needed to.
Yeah.
Roger. Roger, I need to warn you, you're eating into your presentation time. So.
Oh, is it? Oh, well, I won't mention. I was just going to mention the biggest problem probably for transport in North Hertfordshire were the bottlenecks at Welling, both on the railway and the A1M, compared with the railway lines that radiate out to the top of the county and the roads that radiate out at the top of the county. Feeding from the south to the London conurbation, there's only 2 railway tracks and 4 lanes of motorway. That I think is the biggest problem for transport. But sorry, I don't want to eat into my 5 minutes.
Sorry, that was a bit unfair of me to that, but that's clearly not an issue the council can do very much about. John.
Thank you, Steve.
And I warn you, you're eating into your presentation time as well.
Anyway, do please take account of the strategies by electric vehicle charger providers for their rollouts, including supermarkets, and their encouragement of having chargers on the premises. That was one point. And the other, perhaps for AOB, is that there was a slew of misinformation in 2 little points, giving popular myths about electric cars by the officers. I'm not getting at the officers because those are popular misunderstandings, and these were amongst off-the-cuff replies in the public participation at the last meeting, and they were meant to be helpful, and nearly all the points were not only helpful but accurate. That's all.
Yeah, thank you.
I've provided that by email, so I'm not cutting into my time.
Chris.
Thanks. I'll keep it brief. Thank you for your presentation, Edward. Do we know, obviously, Herts County Council are fortunate to get the money from the BSIP funding, but got substantially less than they were asking for. Have we got any information yet on how Herts County Council are paring back on the schemes in their BSIP now that they know what money they're getting and what they can actually feasibly deliver? Have they provided any further information on that?
They've given me sort of partial updates. So I know some about what's being prioritised, but the full detail has not yet been. Well, it only hasn't been published, and probably hasn't been quite finalised. I mean, what I can say is it focuses on improving the connections between the larger towns of Hertfordshire. So actually, there's no specific services in North Hertfordshire which are going to be sort of enhanced through this other than Herts links. So the benefit to North Hertfordshire will be primarily through the reduced fares.
Okay. Thanks very much. Let's move on now then. So now
very quickly.
Well,
I just suggest that maybe putting the solar panels on the car parks could be a community project where residents could invest into a community energy providing scheme. And then, so you provided the charge points, but we could maybe the local residents could contribute towards the cost of putting the solar panels as covers for the car parks?
I think community energy schemes are an interesting idea and something that we need to give
And
some
we
thought to.
could merge
Yeah.
the two
Thank you.
together.
Yes, I understand that. Okay, we really now do need to move on. So thanks very much, Edward, and thanks, Andrew, for your session. So we have two registered speakers. The first is Roger and the second is John. So Roger.
Oh, hi. Oh, thank you very much for this opportunity to speak on behalf of us on zero carbon housing and your SPDs. We're very keen to get zero carbon housing introduced into all these new estates. There's something like 10,000 houses in the 5 big new estates in the local plan, all blisters on the edges of the existing towns. And just like to make these points about any prospective SPD.
Sorry, Roger, just to ask, do you want me to share your slides?
I'll tell you when, in 3 paragraphs time, to be precise. And I'll try and cut this out and make it as brief as possible, because I appreciate we're running out of time. I call on the council to specify the call for no mains gas to be enabled in the large new estates in the SPDs. The council have declared a climate emergency. Gas prices have risen significantly. Alternative heating methods are available, and building to passive house or LETI standards makes gas unnecessary. One of the associated documents in the local plan states in table 1C that the SPD is highly relevant in terms of promoting sustainable development. Blah, 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 blah. And surely this opens the door to you guys justifying the banning of gas in these larger estates. I have trawled through and word searched the latest version of the SPD and the local plan, and can find no mention of gas or central heating. Ditto the Hearts Renewable and Low Carbon Energy Technical Study, which is referenced in the SPD section 8.10 and is now 12 years out of date. But I conclude that although the study calls for zero carbon by 2016, on new builds, the exact meaning of zero carbon is ill-defined. I'd like very quickly, if we could have slide 1, please, to define what I think is a zero carbon house. If we can do this. Oh, excellent. Right, there we go. This is a very unattractive house, but it only needs 3 kilowatts of heating, has high levels of insulation, typically 40 centimeters, mechanical heat recovery system, roofs that only have one facet that face southeast or southwest and covered with solar panels. The larger south-facing roof window facing windows have shading. There's a very compact design. Ideally, it should be spherical for minimum heat loss, but a square box is about as optimum as you get. Unheated area for workshop storage, bicycles and recycling. What shouldn't be included in any of these new builds is gas, chimneys, garages. Nobody puts their car in the garage anymore. All charging points tend to be on the outside of houses, and of course, no bay windows. I'm just going through some specifics on this. Again, I mentioned this sort of house only needs 3 kilowatts of heating. Most houses built in the 60s, 70s need 20 to 30 kilowatts of heating. Even lots of eco measures now are struggling to get down to 12 to 15 kilowatts. But if you build to LETI or passive house standards, you can get this down to 3 kilowatts. Bricks are a problem. Bricks are very attractive. Architects have trouble designing attractive houses without them, but bricks are not good insulators. They're not watertight. They're not airtight. They have a high carbon content, and instead we should be using wooden frames infilled with rigid insulation. The Norwegians, the Canadians, the Swedes do not use bricks. If we could go to slide 2, please. Typically 4 centimeters of insulation with an all-over vapor control level are required. Mechanical heat recovery systems can control humidity and air quality as well as temperature, giving much better air quality in domestic housing. You need to maximize the solar panel area. Shading canopies maximizes winter solar gain and minimizes summer gain, and minimum external surface areas, etc., reduce heat loss to a minimum. And finally, just to wrap up, stating categorically that gas will not be enabled in any of these new estates in your SPDs provides a very powerful lever which force developers to take insulation and draft proofing seriously and force modernisation of common practices. I see new estates advertised as low or zero carbon, and yet they have chimneys, bay windows, homes faced with brick, and so forth. Canadians, Norwegians, even New Zealanders do not use brick. London, of course, is 600 miles north of Montreal, for example, and we only have the heat that we do have thanks to the Atlantic Gulf Stream, and that, of course, is slowing down. Climate change threatens that benefit we get. And the last 2 points, hiding behind out-of-date building regulations is no longer acceptable. As little as 3 kilowatts of heating is required for more modern standards, like the London Energy Transformation Initiative, LETI. If they're adopted, they can achieve a zero carbon, et cetera, et cetera. I'll just wrap up. It is supposed to be government policy by 2025 for new builds, but there's no reason why North Hertfordshire Council can't introduce a no gas policy right now as soon as you issue your first SPD. Just 2 more points if I've still got half a minute.
Yes.
Have I? Thank you.
Half a minute.
Half a minute. Thank you. LETI says that to achieve passive house or LETI standards actually costs £8,000 to £14,000 more. So these standards do cost, but surely the price differential must be significantly reduced. This estimate was in 2019. Since then, energy prices have risen significantly, so the significance of this price differential is reduced. There is the danger that on bills authorised before 2025, boilers will still be required and ultimately will need expensive retrofits to heat pumps in 2035 when gas is totally banned for domestic heating. The SPD calls for high-speed data highways in these estates. Well, in the same wavelength, you can say what can't be put into these new estates. If you can say data highways must be put in, you could equally say gas mustn't be put in. So finally, there is now no excuse not for banning gas in new builds.
I think we understand your point about gas, Roger.
Please get it written into the SPDs. I've finished.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, well, we'll hear a bit more about the SPD shortly. I think you raised some really interesting issues. And we also need to remember the construction carbon impacts as well as the in-use carbon impacts. And you've covered some of those issues as well. John.
That's me. Right. I wanted to raise in this forum some misspoken statements that were given in answer to public participation. One was that there was research that showed that car tires release 4 kilograms of particulate matter. Electric vehicles are heavier than internal combustion engine vehicles and were likely to release more particulate matter. Not so. I'm providing a link by the RAC for anybody who wants evidence on that. Okay, and I'll copy. Oh, there's other sources. Next point is whether electric vehicles emit less nitrogen dioxide but are expensive. I don't see how expensive and nitrogen dioxide go together, but still, particulate matter is still released from electric vehicles through general wear, which could increase levels in the air. In fact, electric vehicles emit no nitrogen dioxide. There's a link. Next, I'll copy the link before I lose track. Depending on how, when, and where they're purchased, electric vehicles are not necessarily more expensive than fossil fuels. I present you with the next two useless Citronami. Other useless brands are available. And finally, relative to the case of fossil fueled vehicles, electric vehicles do not increase levels of particulate matter in the air. There's air particulates, and there's a link from the RAC.
Okay.
But the RAC and the Guardian, no less, to provide evidence. This is because I couldn't bear to let those points, which are amongst many helpful ones, as I said, to pass unremarked. Thank you, Steve.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, I think clearly, I think the point that we're trying to make is that reduction in travel is an important part of reducing emissions as well.
Absolutely.
And electric cars are certainly preferable to cars that run on fossil fuels. Although how preferable depends on the construction carbon impacts, and also, of course, on whether or not the electricity being used to charge them is generated from renewable sources. But I understand the points you're making there. Thank you very much for that, John. That now moves us on to the Sustainability Supplementary Planning document. Debbie.
Right, thank you very much, Steve. Can I just apologise, just in case my dog barks in the background? He's sleeping at the moment, but you never know. So I just want to pick up on the point that John raised at the beginning about the local plan review, and obviously what Councillor Jarvis said about the time that it's taken in terms of the adoption. And I do appreciate those points. The Sustainable Supplementary Planning document, is one of 3 documents that we have proposed to produce in the next year before our local plan review begins in earnest. So there will be the sustainability SPD, a biodiversity one, and a design SPD, which will all sit together and talk to each other and cover all the points that have been raised. So Georgina, if you wouldn't mind popping the little presentation up. It's not really, my intention is not to tell you what's going to happen. My intention is just to set out what the purpose of the SPD is, what we've got to at the moment, and then for you to input any more points that you would like us to include. So Roger, I have made a number of notes about the points that you raised just now. This document isn't like a final version or anything. It is more a skeleton structure for us to put meats on the bone to, and then it will go out for consultation in a usual standard manner. So this is not by any means the one and only time that you will be seeing this. So next one, please, George. So the SPD, as we call them, builds upon the policies that we've already got in the local plan. So bearing in mind how out of date the local plan is, even when it was adopted, we've got certain policies in that local plan that we can then build upon. So it can't introduce new planning policy into the local plan, but it does become a material consideration for decision making. And so our development management team will have to use it, and developers will have to pay attention to that document when they are forming their development sites. Next one, please, George. So in our local plan, strategic policy 1 provides the hook that we can hang this SPD off of for the sustainability. So it will provide further technical interpretations of standards and requirements, the process that needs to be followed, and a general expansion on the direction of travel. So obviously, in the recent few years, that direction of travel has become more prominent and has sped up a great deal. And we need to pass that on to the developers that, they need to be exceeding those minimum requirements that building regulations and so on and so forth put upon them. Next, please, George. So as you all know, sustainability refers to the way in which we meet our own needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. And this covers across natural resources, social and economic. The sustainability SPD will largely concentrate on the natural resources, but will take account of any social and economic issues as well. And we will be looking at an integrated approach that can cover the whole of our district. Next, please, George. So what we've done so far is we've had good discussions with George and her team in terms of the HCCSP work that they've done, and we are drawing in details from their documents that sit at Hertfordshire County Council sort of level and district level. So we've brought in elements of that work. We've also gone through the central government sustainable development goals. So these are goals that each department in central government have adopted, and we intend to sort of pick those out and draw them out within our sustainability SPD as well, so that we can show a joined up approach coming from central government down through to us at the district level and then out to our developments within the district. Next, please, George. So what we want to include, and this is a kind of a bit of a brain dump at the moment. So we'll be looking at technical guidance, which is quite non-specific and could be applied anywhere in the country. And this looks at the energy efficiencies, low carbon, passive design, EV charging points, as Edward touched on earlier as well, and also waste materials and water use, as Andrew touched on earlier as well. Next, please, George. Then we want to look at things that are more specific to North Herts. So this would be bringing in the zero carbon, zero waste, more sustainable transport, more sustainable materials, how we use the land and wildlife. And then this would obviously link back to the biodiversity SPD that will be coming forward. And then elements of culture and community and health and well-being, and, you know, that use of open space and those elements. Just to pick up on the points that Roger made in terms of like orientation of housing and insulation and sort of the non-mains gas supplies, we would include them probably in the previous technical guidance for developments. The orientation as well will certainly be something that will come up in the design guide in terms of reducing the need for additional power to either cool a house or warm a house. And, you know, that's a real obvious thing that we can do. So that's kind of where we're at the moment. And we wanted this to be the opportunity for you to point out anything that you think we've massively overlooked. We don't think we have, but it is a bit like snow blindness when you get into this, and it sort of, you know, you can go down sort of rabbit holes here, there and everywhere. So I think that's my last slide. Is it, George? Oh, no, sorry. So we're looking at introducing sustainability standards as well. So this is an example of what Harlow and Gilston Garden Town have done. So we're sort of bringing a low, medium and high quality scheme. So the low, and in this case, the red one, would be like the bare minimum meeting building regulations. But then we would be encouraging developers to meet the medium quality. And in most instances, we'd want them to meet the high quality standard. But it gives our development control team something to assess applications against. So this is something that we've sort of floated as an idea, and we're just trying to gauge your opinion of what you think about it as well. And it kind of makes the developer think that they're in control and, you know, they're making a decision, but really we're sort of gently guiding them towards improvements and betterments across the way. Now, I think that is my last slide, George. Yay, it is. So, yeah, really any questions or any thoughts or anything that you want to see included in the SPD. As I said, this isn't a final version. It will be drawn up and it will go out to consultation. So there will be a further opportunity to input, but we just wanted to gauge your opinions in the first instance, really.
Okay, thanks very much. And obviously, I mean, so you've had some opinions before you did your presentation.
Yep.
And obviously you'll take those on board. I mean, I think in terms of the last slide, there is a discussion that, I mean, I've had with a number of developers about the benefits for them of delivering more than the bare minimum in terms of environmental requirements.
Yeah.
You know, and clearly that the people they're selling their houses to will need to consider the whole life cost, not just the upfront purchase cost.
Mm-hmm.
And that's clearly more difficult in terms of when one's delivering affordable housing, when there are some more serious cost constraints, but ought to be easily achievable in some other cases. So I think there's an interesting question as to how that mechanism will work in practice, and how many will say they can't afford to do more than the bare minimum. Mm-hmm. But Roger.
Yeah, just a very quick one. There is a view that the councils can't build any to a higher standard than the building regs say. Do I take it you don't feel hidebound by that constraint?
We can't require developers to build to a higher level than the building regs. We can only encourage them at this present time, and that is what we intend to do. So that by setting out our stall, you know, we want to show developers that this is what's expected of them. Come the local plan review, that's a whole different ball game.
That sounds a bit weak. Can't we be stronger than that? There are lots of councils that have made their housing estates to much higher standards than the building regs. Can't you insist that these developers build better?
Not through our supplementary planning documents, we can't. Through our local plan review, we can. And this is a step towards that. But as I said, given the time that this previous local plan has taken, you know, we are slightly on the back foot, but we are doing what we can with what we've got at the moment until our local plan review starts.
Hopefully the next local plan won't take as long.
Hopefully.
John.
Yes, I would contend that a council can insist on certain standards as long as it's building council houses. Right. Having made that rather unfair point, I'd like to ask, Debbie, could circularity, that is a circular economy of materials, please be explicitly addressed in the sustainability standards, recognizing that quite a few things, materials, actually have got a circular economy, we're just not terribly aware of it. Water, cars, batteries, such like, yep, in passing. And the councils are very much part of those schemes, largely, the commercial ones as well. I think that's what I wanted to say.
Okay, thanks, John. Debbie, do you want to respond on that?
Yes, certainly. I've made a note of it, and I will work with Henry, my colleague, who is writing the document up. We shall investigate that further. Have we got your contact details, John, if we wanted to get in contact with you?
You probably do many times over, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure the council has John's contact details.
Yeah.
So I'm sure George has got those.
Thanks, George.
Thanks, John. Dear Linda.
Just wondering whether by redesigning the council tax or property tax, one could reduce the council tax for the better, more energy efficient, less environment demanding properties, and thus make them more favorable or likely that developers will build because they'll become more desirable for the purchaser.
Well,
So by designing the council tax, we could also kind of nudge the house building to go that way.
I think that many of us would dearly like to redesign council tax in a variety of different ways, but unfortunately we're not allowed to do that. There are some serious constraints about the way it operates, and there is no flexibility, essentially. I mean, there is an interesting discussion about whether or not by increasing the capital value of a house and then decreasing its running costs, whether or not that would increase or decrease its council tax band. Given that these things weren't dreamt up in 1992 when this scheme was put together, I'm not quite sure what the impact of that would be. I think one of the things that we've tried to do in the panel is to restrict ourselves largely to things where the council can actually have some influence. And there's clearly many issues about nature recovery and carbon reduction where we can't have any direct effect. There are certainly some where we seek to lead the community in a certain direction and set an example. And there are some where we lobby the government to do better. Neither of those things is necessarily easy, and neither of them will necessarily produce the right results, but we will continue to try to do both of them. I can't see any more hands. So thanks very much, Debbie, for that. I suspect that some of the panel members may subsequently make some detailed comments, having had the time to think about it. This is the last panel meeting of the civic year. So what we've done today is largely to talk about what we've done, what the council has set out to do and what it's achieved, and to update people on that, and hopefully that was useful and informative. We will need to think about what should be on the work programme for the next civic year. I think that the first meeting of the civic year will need to finalise what that is, but it would certainly be useful to have inputs there. I'm well aware that if Gerald had been here, he would have raised the issue of water and sewage, and I think that that's something that would be worth exploring. I think there's both. I mean, we've touched a little on the issues around water supply and the impact of that on the environment. But there are certainly issues about the disposal of wastewater and its impact on the environment as well. So I think that's one of the things that we might consider. And the other interesting issue that was raised tonight that we haven't talked about, and I think we probably should, is the whole issue around community energy, which is, I think, something that we ought to be thinking about what we might be able to do. Because I think there's, as I said, one of the most significant things the council could do is not just about cutting its own emissions, but about changing the way in which the community as a whole behave. And community energy, I think, is a potential way to do that. So those are just two things that occurred to me as a result of tonight's discussion. I'd be very happy to hear other suggestions now, or people can pass them to Georgina. Presumably they should come to you, should they?
Yeah, if anyone has ideas after the meeting, just drop me an email.
But happy to hear any now if you want to raise them now. Looks like you don't. Okay. Well, thanks very much for your participation this evening. We've had some interesting presentations, I think, and some good questions and discussion. The next panel meeting is in the next civic year. I'm not sure, there probably is a date for it, but I have no idea what it is. But it will be advertised in the normal way. We've now got quite a long list of people that we inform about these meetings so they can come along and participate. And it forms an important part of the council's engagement with the community on environment matters. So thank you for all of you who've come along to participate.
Steve, I think John had one quick AOB.
Okay.
Yes, please. I'm just seizing this opportunity at the end of the council year to formally announce, though many of you know it already, of the winding up of the local charity Transition Town Letchworth as a CIO, and the formation of a discussion group within Letchworth Arts and Leisure Group to be called Decarbonise Letchworth.
Okay.
But that's only a discussion group, not a formal charity, only addressing housing and transport, not the slew of projects, topics, initiatives, goodness knows what, that TTL covered across quite a few years. I also wanted to, through yourselves, through the chairs, to thank the council for a great deal of support when one looks back through joint projects, help, advice, and so on. I can see other ex-TTLers nodding. The formal closure, subject to no interventions in the meanwhile, will take place in August, care of the Charity Commission, but the charity is already inactive operationally.
Okay, well, thank
you.
you.
I've provided an email of details and precise statements, but if that gives you a gist, that's what I wanted to say.
Okay, well, thanks
Chair.
very much for telling us about that. I mean, that's in many respects, that's sad news, but this Transition Town Letchworth has made, I think, a very valuable contribution. And in many cases, its influence has stretched beyond Letchworth. But no doubt those of you who are involved in it will continue to participate, just in different ways. So
many new groups have formed in the meanwhile, not necessarily from TTL, and that is what's meant to happen. And then the core group dissolves itself. We've done that. And disperse the assets in particular ways to relevant community.
Thanks very much for explaining that to us, and hopefully we will not lose contact with the people who've made such useful inputs. Okay, thank you very much for your participation, everybody, and good evening.
Thank you.
Night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Night.
Good night.
Bye, everyone.
Close it. I'll close it.